Are they all in your rooms? Do we have maraca capacity? Thank you. Okay. So I think we'll just let people come in. Welcome, welcome. Come, take seats. So just to announce today's prize. Do we have yesterday's prize winner here? Oh, so he can't comment on the fabulousness of the prize, but today's prize will be for the person who tweets the most. So you Twitterati, you better get tweeting. And there will be a fabulous prize at the end of the day. How is everyone feeling after yesterday's meetings and last night? How are you feeling? Atta's feeling fabulous, got some fabulous feeling. Okay, it's one of the dangers of Facebook, is quite a lot of people went and had fun last night, I saw this morning. However, we have work to be done today, so I'll just come and take seats, come. But we'll get started in the interests of keeping our time. So this morning, I was up at 4:30, as you are when you're a bit jet-lagged. And I was thinking a little bit about what came out of yesterday's discussions. I was also reading the newspaper, and I saw there was a headline that announced that Oxfam had just published a report which said that the 4 richest men in Indonesia, and they are all men, their net worth is equal to the 100 million poorest in Indonesia. So I think some of the issues around sort of structural inequalities that came out yesterday are very relevant in the news right now, as is the kind of news coming out of America, the United States. Trump has rescinded various rights for transgender. So, there's serious stuff at play here. So some of the things that remained with me yesterday were there were some very high-level reflections about the quality and nature of our work in philanthropy. I think the point was made that in yesterday's session around the corporate sector and engaging with corporations was that philanthropy and civil society, we do not have the monopoly on virtue. And sometimes we do pat ourselves on the back a little bit too much and look at other sectors perhaps in less generous terms than we see ourselves. I think this idea of intersectionality, which Kumi raised yesterday, and the role of networks such as Wings and the networks that you represent in building those spaces for different actors to come together and to engage. I think there were some questions about whether our systems were fit for purpose. The log frame, the beloved log frame, was mentioned a number of times. Are we spending our time on the right things? And are we asking our partners to be spending time on the right things? And there was a session yesterday on looking at community philanthropy and a question of how do we make the case, how do we grow cultures of giving? So if we're looking at giving as something is not just the repository of the wealthy, how do we grow cultures of giving without taking governments off the hook? But how do we grow cultures of giving as a way of growing citizen activism, participation, that giving becomes a political act, an act of engagement, rather than a substitution for the failures of governments. And then there was just some real nitty-gritty challenges. Somebody in a session yesterday was saying, look, we know social change takes time, but we can't get our donors. Our donors always know best. Our local donors just know best. And so I come to something like this, it's great, and then I have to go back and have the same conversations. I just came from the session on looking at emerging markets philanthropy organized by the Philanthropy for Social Justice and Peace Network. And there, someone from Brazil said, look, let's face it, in Brazil, most people still haven't heard of philanthropy. So you come to an event like this, the network of networks, and I go back home and people still don't get it or see a value for it. So I think these are questions, it's sort of that mixture of high level and very practical, and the role of networks in all of this, that are very much current in our conversations here. I'm going to ask Benjamin to come on. As you know, Benjamin is the new Executive Director of Wings, and he's going to come and make a couple of reflections on the conversations yesterday. But while he's doing that, I would like a couple of people from the audience to make their contributions. So what were you left with yesterday? What did you take home last night? What did you wake up this morning thinking about yesterday's conversation? So we'll take just a couple of comments from the audience, but first, Benjamin, how are you feeling?
Thank you, Jenny. Well, I'm feeling good. Actually, I'm feeling really, really good. Recently a colleague told me, oh, now that you joined the network of Wings, in a way you are on top of the global philanthropy pyramid. So you're laughing, why? And I told them, yes, you're right. We're on top of the philanthropic pyramid, especially here in Mexico. But unfortunately for me, but I should say fortunately actually, it's a reverse pyramid. And I think this network is a kind of anchorage point. It's a hub that connects and supports those who support, those who support, those who support, communities and social leaders throughout the world that are working for social good and for change. And so it's very interesting to be part of this invisible, kind of hidden part of the iceberg that makes the work on the ground that is visible stronger, more efficient, and more sustainable. So it's and if I can spin the metaphor, I would even say that if this infrastructure, if this hidden part is strong enough, if it's interconnected enough, if it's also enough open to other sectors, and we discussed about alliances and intersectionality yesterday, it's also an iceberg that can resist the current negative currents that are trying to diminish, to restrict, and sometimes to annihilate the work that is being done to achieve social change and social good. So yeah, it's very interesting to be part of this hidden part of the iceberg, and also to have with this WINGSForum, and it's really literally the case right now, the spotlights turn on this hidden part and the work that is doing as an invisible but crucial part of civil society. So it feels very good, and it feels good also to see that it's not only a network and names and organizations, but that it's actually people that share common values and objectives. So I can experience that really concretely since yesterday, and it's a very wonderful experience.
Great. Comments, any thoughts from yesterday from the audience? We have a microphone roving. Yes, ma'am, would you introduce yourself as well, please?
Hi, I am Sandra Richardson, part of the Canadian contingent from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I think the session that I really enjoyed yesterday was the one on fact and myth. So they had the little audience responders on the table, and the question would come up, and you immediately went to, oh, that's a myth. And the score came up. And then the discussion with the panelists, which really emphasized, maybe we jump or presume. And it was the interaction with the audience and also with the panelists. So I think what I took away from that is, question everything a bit more, even this. Thank you.
Thank you. We all carry our own theories of change where we know immediately, loaded with assumptions. No, it was very effective in that sense. Thank you. Anyone else? Quick thoughts from yesterday? No thoughts? Oh, Janet. And And Janet, introduce yourself. Oh, well, you've spoken, we know who you are, but you should still introduce yourself.
I'm Janet from KCDF. Anyway, yeah. I found the idea that WINGS, and by extension most of our networks, if not all our networks, are about building bridges, something that was very inspiring. And actually that's from Maria. And especially now when by extension we took it to the idea of how we work with governments, how we work with individuals, high net worth corporates. You know, the idea of building bridges, I think, can take us far.
So sort of rich, deep, thick networks. One more. Is there one more comment from on yesterday? Yes.
James McGowan from Daphne. The most enlightening session for me was the last one of the day yesterday, the not business as usual. I think it builds on the last point of the bridges and who we might connect with, and for me it was a real eye-opener to think of going beyond the traditional philanthropic field and look to relationships that could be developed with the private sector in different ways.
Right, it's not conversations one normally has or in one's day job. I agree, I think it was very good. James, by the way, if you didn't recognize him, he was our Grim Reaper from yesterday, so I'm pleased to announce that he is well and alive again. All right, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Benjamin, who's going to kick off the rest of the morning.
Thank you very much. So I will very briefly introduce the Imagine Award, the Imagine Prize. So this award, this prize, takes its name from the original meeting that is the ancestor of the WINGSForum, and that also is the ancestor of WINGS Network. It's the international meeting of associations serving grantmakers that we, I think, mentioned already, and that was held in 1998 here in Oaxaca in Mexico. And since this period, the network has grown, and the whole field, and we saw it also yesterday when presenting the results of the last report on infrastructure. So this sector has been developing, has been growing, and in 2014, WINGS has decided to create this Imagine Prize to honor and recognize long-term commitment to global philanthropy. And so in 2014, recognizing the pioneering work of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation in developing civil society and philanthropy in countries that were transitioning out of civil war and of repression, especially community-led philanthropy. It was a natural choice to have Bill White, the retiring president at that time and CEO of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, be the first recipient of the award. And so this year, as you will see, the theme of this award is the question of the enabling environment for civil society and philanthropy. And as you can see in the programs, and as you have already started to experience it yesterday, it's a very critical issue, and it's a key issue throughout this forum and for all of you, because most of you are involved on these issues, and so it's very important to take time to look at the achievements that have been also done in this sector, and so I will simply now invite Nick Deshaikivsky from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Program Officer, to come on stage and present this year's awardee of the Imagine Prize. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you. Pardon, I'm going to use the podium. I'm not yet a TED Talk person. But it is truly a privilege, an honor, and a great pleasure to be introducing Douglas Rutzen, the president and CEO of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, as the winner of the 2017 Imagine Award. On two fronts. first as a representative of the Mott Foundation. As you know, we're a supporter of philanthropy infrastructure, but why? It's because we care deeply about civil society, about people having the possibilities to work together for their own benefit and for improving lives in their communities. And the way we do that is we try to find organizations and people that really can make a difference and have a vision and practical solutions and can move forward to support civil society. When it comes to ICNL, I'm not sure who found who, but somewhere back in the 1990s, our foundation and ICNL started working together. And you know, we often have hyperbole in our philanthropy discourse. Everything is transformational and critical and essential and key. But in the case of ICNL, those words really do apply, and in the case of Doug as well. Starting with work on country notes, or that they would work with the Council on Foundations in the United States that provided the picture of what laws in various countries are like that can help U.S. foundations or givers give abroad, to providing a lot of advice, technical assistance, and support, education on the legal framework and regulatory framework that's necessary to help support civil society and philanthropy. On a personal level, let me talk about Doug as a person for a bit. Here's a few things you may not know. He got started in this back in 1989, found himself in Prague speaking to some students who were involved in the Velvet Revolution. They invited him to teach at law school there. I don't know, you must have been about 12 years old, Doug, when that happened. And two of those students got elected to the Czechoslovak parliament, and later they asked him to serve as a legal advisor, which he did, and his first assignment was to help draft the legislation for civil society and for philanthropy there, for nonprofits. And this was at a time that the term civil society was not in vogue like it is today, where nonprofits was a poorly understood concept, particularly in Czechoslovakia or in other countries of the region, and indeed in many places around the world. But because of that work, Doug was then often asked to provide advice in lots of places around the world, and he was rapidly developing expertise on that. So he joined ICNL in 1994. He's been the president and CEO for, I think, about the past 12 years of that organization. But what that indicated, though, back in the 90s when Doug was involved, or at the beginning, is a lot of foresight and vision. And that was a time when, you know, the thread was developing things so things can happen. And right now we're seeing, trying to, in many places of the world, the necessity to say, whoa, you know, they're trying to close that space. What can we do to push back and keep it open? Doug saw this back a while ago, okay, when a lot of us weren't thinking that way. There was an Alliance article in 2006 where he was talking about, wait a minute, Lester Salomon talked about an associational revolution. The associational counter-revolution is happening. Besides forward thinking, Doug evidences a lot of expansive thinking. I find that in conversations with them, but consider that having a UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of association and freedom of assembly, that was Doug's idea, okay? But it's not just having the ideas. Doug evidences perseverance because he organized an advocacy campaign and worked to make that happen. Another example of his perseverance is the fact that he saw through the case against Libya on the Lockerbie bombing. And as Doug relayed to me, that at one point that he was being told, forget it, that it ain't going to happen, that there's not much here, and he stuck to it, and eventually that settlement did happen. So it's not for naught that he was asked that he is the co-chair of the civil society pillar in the community of democracies, that President Obama had invited him to speak on a panel about civil society with other heads of state at the 2013 UN General Assembly. It's not for naught that Doug has been several times named one of the top 50 influential people in the nonprofit sector in the United States by the Nonprofit Times. It's not for naught that the MacArthur Foundation awarded one of its Genius Grants for Organizations to ICNL recently, $1 million award. Doug is an outstanding leader. ICNL has grown, and it's staffed with many highly professional people with the highest degree of integrity and that are dedicated to their work. They're well respected, and I know that Doug has a lot to do with that as the leader. If you speak with Doug in a little bit of time, you will kind of realize that this guy is actually brilliant. And so I also thought, why is he doing this? Because he could go to Wall Street and be making millions of dollars as a corporate lawyer. I'm sure of that. And yet, Doug cares deeply about civil society. He's a warm and caring individual. And in fact, one of the things I like about him when we talk every so often, we get together at conferences, is he starts out with the question, how's your family? He reminds me what's the most important thing in life. Doug is also a humble person. Last night he said, you can roast me, but I couldn't think of what to roast him about. Except maybe, Doug, I actually wonder if you really are a lawyer. Because my experience with lawyers is usually when I start talking to them, I get lost after a while with all the jargon and legalese. And when I speak to Doug, there's a person speaking in very understandable, normal American English. And so I don't know. You'll have to prove to me that you actually are a lawyer, Doug. But anyway, I'd like to thank you for listening to that. But please, I'd like to introduce Doug Rutzen. Come to stage for a presentation. To my friend and colleague, in recognition of his global leadership in promoting the independence and accountability of the philanthropy sector, Doug, you are awarded the Imagine Prize from Wings. Thank you.
Wow, that was embarrassing. That was the kind of introduction that would make my dad proud and my mom would have actually believed. It's an honor to be here. I thank Wings, I thank the Wings board. I thank each and every one of you. As I look out in this audience, I see so many old friends, I see so many new friends, and I see so many friends that I want to make. Because I consider this to be a shared award. It's recognition of the community that is fighting to safeguard civic space and civic freedom around the world. It's recognition of our staff. It's recognition of our board. I see Barbara here. We have an exceptional board. Barbara is a member, and they let me make presentations like the one I'm about to make, which might be a little bit political. But that's the point. I don't like to talk about me. I don't like to talk about ICNL. I'd like to talk about the state of affairs in the world today. In 1974, George Steiner wrote a book called Nostalgia for the Absolute. His premise is that people are attracted to simple theories that sweep away complexity and confusion. Consider mythology. I will try to make this move. Through Zeus and Poseidon, Ares and Athena, the ancient Greeks could explain thunder and lightning, war and peace. This mythology was attractive because it provided a very simple explanation to very complex phenomena. The same attributes make populism appealing. Consider the 1920s and the 1930s. Democracies had gone through economic depression. People felt that their conservative values were being attacked. And we found political leaders who were filling this void with populist theories that will forever stain the pages of human history. I'm reminded of Steiner's book as I consider the world today. In many countries, there's a crisis of confidence in democracy. The public in many countries seems more inclined towards authoritarianism. Here's a stunning statistic I found from the United States. It's from the World Values Survey. In 1995, they asked people, would you support military rule in the United States? In 1995, 1 out of 16 said yes. 2015, 1 out of 6 said yes. And of course, politicians are riding this wave of populism to electoral victory. At ICNL, we work in 100 countries, and we do believe that there's a populist playbook. What are the chapters in that playbook? First, identify a segment of society that feels angry and aggrieved, perhaps because they've lost jobs, or perhaps because they consider their traditional values to be threatened. Second, find an enemy. Maybe it's Muslims, maybe it's migrants, maybe it's Gulenists in Turkey, maybe it's the Jewish philanthropist George Soros. You need to find a scapegoat. Why? Because you can cultivate almost a tribal instinct of us versus them, the politics of identity. Third, offer the promise of a better future if only you believe. This is a difficult, somewhat grainy image, but it's actually a newspaper article from 1934. We found it online with the highlighting already in place. It's an article about Adolf Hitler. If you can read the highlighted section, he told the people of Germany he would make Germany great again. Fourth, tap into emotions. Indeed, try to tap into that instinctual notion of survival, telling people that they have a right to place their interests first, to put their tribe ahead of others. Of course, this is the antithesis of philanthropy, because what do? We try to put the other first. But this is a very, very powerful message. And look, what does America first mean for the world? Here's a quote from Hungary, where Orban says, thanks to Trump, we got permission from the highest place in the world that we too are free to place ourselves first as well. Now, for those of us who studied high school or college economics, we know where this leads. we know about the tragedy of the commons. It may seem perfectly rational to act out of self-interest. It might seem perfectly rational to withdraw from a climate agreement because you don't disadvantage your national industries. But by doing so, we destroy the commons. As Kumi said, we don't destroy the world, we destroy ourselves. Or it might seem perfectly rational to withdraw or renegotiate trade agreements or to impose tariffs. And we know where that leads as well, because we did that in the United States in 1930. It was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. What did that lead to? Increased unemployment in the United States, the collapse of the global economy, and World War II. So going back to where I began, Steiner's point is that populists don't want to hear about the ramifications and facts around their policies. Why? Because they're popular, specifically because they provide a simple explanation to a complex world. As a result, populists tend to reject dissent. They say, you're on our side or you're the enemy. Here's a tweet just from the 17th, where the news is considered not the enemy of a particular individual or politician, but an enemy of the American people. They also use the law to restrict the media. Today, we talk about internet restrictions, but think about the technology of the 16th century to spread communications. It was Gutenberg's printing press. And in 1534, King Henry VIII banned the import of any books that were printed on the continent using this new information technology. So it's a time-tested technique to restrict the freedom of expression. As President Obama once said, countries and governments that don't listen to their people will hear from them on the street. And again, we see the law being used as a tool of choice to restrict peaceful assemblies. It goes back in history. I tried to find the first example of the law being used to limit dissent. The first I could find was the trial of Socrates. What was he tried for? For assembling with students in the Athenian Agora and challenging what I said at the beginning, the strength and power of Greek gods. We see this playing out in other countries as well. In the United States, we're now tracking 11 states that are preemptively trying to put in place laws that will restrict peaceful demonstrations in the United States. And finally, restrictions on civil society and philanthropy. Since 2012, we've been tracking these trends, and we see 161 restrictive initiatives considered or enacted in countries around the world. I don't want to leave you just with a depressing note. I go to these meetings and people diagnose the problem and they don't talk about possible solutions. So on a lighter note, I remember the famous philosopher Pogo the Possum. He's the guy who, during the height of McCarthyism, has the famous quote, "We have seen the enemy and he is us." The second quote, which he's well known for, is we're confronted with insurmountable opportunity, that in fact there are enormous opportunities if only we try. So what are some of these opportunities? First, when you go to a global conference, we have a bit of a tendency to focus on what we have in common. We then develop common action plans. Makes sense, but that obscures that what we have in common may not be what's important at a country level. It may not be the activities most likely to produce change. If you want to, for example, protect civic space in the United States, protect marginalized groups, or protect the environment, we might opt for a litigation strategy, and you see that playing out today in the US. But I was talking to Başak when I arrived. This is not a strategy you could use in, for example, Turkey. Or when we talk about challenges in Hungary, there's EU advocacy that's probably going to be persuasive there, but will have no impact, as Masha told me, in a place like Russia. Accordingly, the first step is to focus on country strategies. You don't have to raise your hand, but think about it. How many organizations in this room have been involved in developing a country strategy to address issues of civic space or populism. I think we need to start there. Only then can we turn to the second issue, which is commonalities and ways that we can work together. Third, we do need to be careful with our narratives, because as we see populists try to play into this notion of identity, us versus them. And I think this is quite interesting, because if you think about it, we often use their very language. How many times at this conference have we heard the term foreign funding? Foreign, the other. The other is funding in our country. But if you think of the Hilton Hotel or Turkish Airlines or Google, we don't call them foreign funded companies. We hold them on a pedestal. They're multinational, they're international. We consider them to be on a different plane. So I think we need to be very careful and focus on our narratives and our language so we don't use the language of governments that seek to control us. Now, fourth, some groups might say, yeah, but this isn't about us. I get this point about social justice, but my board won't support it. It's not in my mandate. What I would tell you is please think of a way to integrate issues of social justice into your activities. This is a headline just from last week where museums and libraries fought the issue of fake news and alternative facts with a day of facts. Or from Europe, museums that are using their exhibitions to address the issue of the politics of identity. In fact, I think there's many things we can do to integrate and mainstream this counter-narrative and the issue of civic space into every organization in this room. And I think it'd be interesting for WINGS to consider preparing some research on the issue of philanthropy and civil society and what we can do during an era of populism. And finally, if you're a campaigner, please join us because there's simply so much to do. We have to reach out beyond traditional NGOs. We have to embrace trade unions and social movements and faith-based organizations. We need to reach out to other sectors, unusual allies. We find in many countries the media is under attack, the judiciary is under attack. Even businesses are complaining about interventionist governments that's telling them, you cannot move your factory to another country. You must stay put, and we will interfere with free market decisions. So we need to focus on sectoral alliances and building a movement. We also can't just focus on society's elite. We need to engage with the person on the street. So we need civic education, yes, but I would also say there's a role for philanthropy in creating safe spaces for dialogue at a community level. In many countries, it's very hard to have a non-polarized discussion, and sometimes we don't actually understand the concern of the other. We need those safe spaces for dialogue. So in conclusion, as we look around the world, I think that we're in the midst of a historic struggle over civil society, philanthropic freedom, and in fact, democracy. Cornerstone concepts are being discussed, debated, and at times violently contested. But let us not be passive observers while history is being made by others. Instead, through meetings like this, let's reach out, let's gain inspiration and strength from one another, and then let's reach up, and together, let's bend that proverbial arc of history towards justice, dignity, and freedom. We shall succeed, but we'll only do it together. Thank you.
Wow, I've got the chills. That was fantastic, Doug. Thank you. It was exactly what we needed to wake us up and energize us as we continue our way through WINGSForum. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, we have between now and coffee a panel discussion on the sort of different narratives of development. So could I invite Ian to bring your panel, Ian Bird from Community Foundations of Canada. I'll hand over to you and you can introduce your people.
Great, thanks Jenny. Bonjour tout le monde. Hey? Good morning. Buenos dias, all right. So, Doug's amazing, right? Nick, lovely introduction. I want you to know that I'm on Jenny time, okay? Jenny's reminded me we've got to keep to the time. And so she's going to give me like the 5-minute warning, right? And I'm going to invite Sophia and Pedro and Timo to come up and find their seats. Where's Lauren out there? There's Lauren. Lauren's going to get a mic as well. And I'm just going to set the scene for this, but I just want you to all know that actually this is your session. Okay, that we met over breakfast this morning and we decided amongst us here that as much as it will be a chance to learn from the experience in Indonesia and here in Mexico and elsewhere, it's really an opportunity for you to participate. Okay, so let me just set the scene a little bit, make some introductions, and then we'll get underway. Okay, I live in a place called Chelsea, Quebec. It's just near Ottawa. How many people have been to Ottawa? Okay, the snow is about this. It's about here right now. Lots of snow, so we're really happy to be here in Mexico. But if we went back not too many years, actually, where I would be living would be the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. It's a historic indigenous gathering place. Actually, Ottawa means gathering place. And the Ottawa people actually used to come from the south and to the west and meet up with the Algonquin people from the north. But over the last probably 1,500 years, it's really been the home of the Algonquins, and we're now really guests of theirs. This local context is important, and it's something that we just heard Doug talk about with the idea of understanding context, and I think we're going to hear more about this as well through the panel. The reason we're going to hear about it is we're going to be having a dialogue with you in the Fishbowl format around measuring impact. Okay? Most everyone in the room in some way is involved with measuring impact. Thinking about how to share what they're learning, thinking about the quantitative dimension of understanding impact, but maybe increasingly or hopefully thinking more about the qualitative dimension, the stories that are told, the deep knowledge that exists from different perspectives. And as I think we heard through the course of the day yesterday with the Grim Reaper and the angel and with the many discussions in the hallways, there's a real interest in exploring measuring impact, maybe contesting or challenging assumptions. And so we want to open this up for many perspectives. And here's how we're going to do that. You can see that there's a couple of empty seats here in the fishbowl. So right now, I know that some of you are thinking, I've got something to share. My perspective or our organization's perspective or our region's perspective on this large frame around measurement and around impact. And so I'm starting already by inviting you at any time, when you're ready, right, up you come, find your seat, okay? And you'll join in with our panelists. Our panelists at some point too may jump off the stage, say, I've had enough of this, you know? I've said my piece, where's the coffee, right? So they may be jumping back down and joining you, and we're gonna create a dynamic. The other thing, and I'm gonna ask Lauren to introduce herself in a second, is Lauren and I, we're gonna be out with you. So if you're a little worried about making the big move, coming up the aisle, up the steps, finding a seat, and you just wanna raise your hand, you can do that too, okay? But no soliloquies from the seats, right? Ask a question or keep it short, right? Or we'll send the Grim Reaper or the angel to find you. Okay, so Lauren, why don't you just introduce yourself so that the group knows about you as well.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're really excited to get this conversation going. I'm Lauren Bradford. I'm the Director of Global Partnerships at Foundation Center. You've probably seen my colleague Larry floating around the last few days as well. So we're here to meet your data and knowledge needs and talk about data and knowledge as it relates to impact. So, and I'm also Ian's sidekick for the day.
Okay, are we good? Are you ready? Yeah. Et tu prêt? Tu prêt? What's ready? Are you ready in Spanish? Someone help me out. Listo. Okay. All right.
Don't be shy.
I'm not sure, you guys, it's quiet in the back rows, and I don't want to have to pick on Lisa back there or, you know, David, okay? I've got my eye on you. Okay, everyone's ready? Right, Janet? Okay. First, let me introduce Pedro. Who was at the event last night? Hey, amazing. Well, this man's been a big part of helping to foster the development of Montepiedad, and he's going to share with us the experience and the moment in time that this organization's at in this pivotal transition that they're going through. We also have Sophia, amazing, from Sacred Fire Foundation, and all sorts of work, well, based in Mexico, actually working globally around in the indigenous context. And she's going to share as well some of her experience. And then Timoteus joins us, all the way from Indonesia. I think he's spending more time on the airplanes than he is here in Mexico, you know, so amazing that he's able to join us and share the perspective as well. And I'm actually going to start with Pedro, okay? And I'm going to ask Pedro just to describe a little bit the moment that their organization is in around taking stock after 15 years working with about 500 organizations around trying to assess the kind of impact that they've had. So Pedro, why don't you lead us off?
Thank you, Ian. Well, Montepiedad started over 2 centuries ago helping people through collateralized small loans. But about 15 years ago, we started providing grants in a more formal way to Mexican private foundations. We've worked with around 1,600 of them, and on a yearly basis, we work with 500, providing grants and funds for their operations. Starting around 2010, we started looking more into measuring what was the impact that our grants were having throughout Mexico. Because these foundations, as you can imagine, cover a wide array of issues throughout our country. And we started looking at the methodology that was available, not only here in Mexico, but worldwide. And we started to find that even though we provide more than 4 billion in grants through this period, that we were not moving the needle as much as we wanted. Of course, for the individual foundations, they were receiving large grants, and for them it was a big difference. But as a whole, we were not doing the best that we could. So in the past 2 years, we've been going through a very arduous, difficult and hard experience within the organization and try to find a new strategy, how to really move these needles in maybe less causes, more focused, but in a much better way. So we're going through all this process, trying to find what really works. And of course, measuring is a major part of that. We have a new director that is in charge, Marisol, who is also here. She just joined this January, and she's going to have to translate all these mind tricks into real actions for maybe a smaller number of foundations, but on a much higher impact for our country.
Sophia, could you now introduce the work of Bien Vivir and the perspective that you have on measuring impact?
Yes. Well, so I work with an organization called Sacred Fire Foundation. And as you were saying, Ian, we work internationally, and our focus is working with indigenous communities worldwide to help them make sure of the continuance of traditional knowledge. So we have a very special focus on preserving this perspective, trying to promote the values of this perspective. And in working with indigenous communities and speaking about indigenous perspective, there's a specific concept that the indigenous peoples of South America have, which is the Buen Vivir concept. I don't know if any of you have heard about this. But so the basic concept of Buen Vivir stems from the Quechua people of the Andes, and it has to do with a way of living in the world. So, and I'll get to why this is important in terms of measuring impact, but the point is, from the indigenous worldview, Buen Vivir is, you could sort of translate it into good living, but it's bigger than that. It has to do with putting the community at the center. So it's a community-centered perspective. It also has to do with relationship. It has to do with putting relationship at the center of things, how we relate to each other and how we relate to the world around us. Therefore, it's ecologically balanced. And lastly, it's culturally sensitive. So what this means is it's the well-being of the individual, but in the context of its social context, so to speak. So our work, because we work with indigenous communities, we have found that the work in our grant making is sort of difficult to measure, because the things or the initiatives that we support have to do with supporting this perspective and supporting this kind of knowledge and living in the world. So when our donors ask us, well, but what are your indexes for impact measurement? How do you quantify how successful you've been with the support that you've given? And we sort of say, well, the indexes that are out there don't really work for us because we're supporting something else. So we had to go through all of this process that maybe I'll share with you in a little while to come up with something that would make sense for us, that could really also embody this different perspective, this different way of living in the world, which is what, as a foundation, we are also trying to promote in the philanthropic world and everywhere. So that's a little bit of our story.
That's a great way into this. And Timo's been doing a lot of thinking about measuring impact in the work in Indonesia, and has really considered 4 levels for the work that's going on there. Timo, do you want to describe for the group the 4 levels?
Okay. Philanthropy Indonesia is a membership organization. The member is from family foundation, corporate foundation, and some from community foundation. For measurement impact of the organization, we have a 4-level measurement. First is participant or beneficiaries reaction. It's aimed to evaluate an effectiveness of the program that is done by asking the satisfaction of the participant on various aspects and the implementation process of the program. On this level, this is focused on the satisfaction of the program. And the second satisfaction of the program include the material and the process of the program implement in the community or in the organization. The second is measurement aspect of learning. It's determine whether participant knowledge is expanding after participating in activities or program. This second level of measurement is generally done by providing pre- and post-tests to see changes in program participant. Knowledge on a variety of programs include material and information about the program. And the third is application behavior measurement. This is intended to measure the impact of program or activities in behavior change of the citizen who become participant or beneficiary of the program. The third level of evaluation is more vital because it measures whether the knowledge taught in the program has been applied by the participant in their daily activity, their daily program. And the last is the fourth is a measure of the performance. It's intended to measure whether the program has been done, can provide a positive impact of the welfare of citizens, the program of the phase. This is it. We can measure the quality of the program. This is the impact of the activities. I think this.
Thibault, that's great. I mean, there's a real sophistication here, right, of thinking about the kind of learning that goes on or how to engage beneficiaries, right, and the behavior change and the actual performance. So all these ways into measuring impact that we've heard from our panelists to just set the scene. So I'm going to ask each of them, and whoever wants to go first, just go for it, to say, given that context, what are you doing now? You know, Sophia, how are you responding to the challenge? And Pedro, where does this take you at this pivot that you're under? Who wants to go first?
We're playing tag with the mic. Well, in our case, as I was saying before, it did pose a challenge, and I will be curious to hear from people in the audience to figure out how they are doing it. Because this whole conversation about qualitative versus quantitative is at the core of our issue here. And what we did was one of the things we did was we developed a theory of change as a tool to, on the one hand, figure out internally if we are really accomplishing what we're hoping to accomplish, and on the other hand, have more clarity as in terms of how to speak of our work with our donors or with, you know, the broader audience or whatever. And so in doing that, we did find that there is ways to talk about the qualitative aspects of it, because since traditional knowledge and work with indigenous peoples is about a more holistic view that takes everything as a whole and not just dissects it or measures it in terms of how much growth happened, but more about how the relationship within the community and with its environment and their land was strengthened. We found that, for example, a very good tool is storytelling. So a narrative way of introducing impact and explaining how sort of the snowball effect, how because we supported this specific initiative, this happened in the community, and when we come back, I can talk about an example and give you a little story, how that impacted a community and that affected change, and how we can see that evolving to what you were saying, you know, how do you track change? How do you see if there's more participation or not? You can do it with narrative, and you can do it with a theory of change. So those are some of the tools that we used to sort of solve the issue.
And in the meantime, we had our first brave newcomer to the panel, Alina. So do you want to add in now? Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alina Porum from Association for Community Relations. You've seen me on the 4C team. And actually, I was very inspired by this conversation. I don't think I'll reflect a lot on the 4C experience, but more on the thoughts we're having in our organization about evaluating impact and thinking about social change. And for me, this dilemma between measurement and holistic approach is a critical one. I was just thinking that actually when you're trying to measure, you have to break it down and isolate. And there is a critical challenge of how you bring it together back in a way in which it makes sense. And I think this is critical not just as the evaluation methodology, but also how we see our relationships with partners that we're trying to support and with change. In our experience, as we've been supporting community foundations, actually we do want them to think independently about what is important for them. And while we have to measure things, it means we have to know what type of change we want to see. But if the change we want to see, it's only the change that we want to see, that is a problem. So actually how we engage constituencies of thinking about the change and how we engage constituency of reflecting new information in their context about these changes is critical, and that makes it difficult. So that's for startup from me.
Thank you, Alina. And I think that's a really good segue into something that Pedro might share with us around what we want to see versus what really needs to happen and what's relevant on the ground.
That's a major issue for us because, as you were saying, when you have to evaluate so many ideas and business models through so many foundations, what we have learned is that there's not a single model that works for everyone. So you have to take a step back and say, let the foundation choose their own evaluation model, their own measuring. Some foundations are already at the level where they can have qualitative and quantitative measuring, but most of them cannot do that. Most foundations may be just at the level of quantitative measuring, which is, I think it's easier because it deals with numbers, with things that can be counted and measured, versus the qualitative side that really has to take into account what the community is going through, the cultural side of the community. And in Mexico, you can imagine the wide variety of cultures that we have. So we've had to learn that it's not for us to impose that model, that metric, that process. But what we have been doing is provide the funds to those foundations that want to go through that process so that they can hire a specialized firm that will help them in the measuring process if they want to do it. And we've had about 110 of those foundations that work with us on a year-to-year basis that have gone through that process. And we have about 100 other foundations that said to us, we're not going to do that because it's going to put so much stress through our organization that we're not willing to do it. So we're also trying to find a way how to help those foundations that are not going through the process, because it's going to be more difficult to allocate the funds to them since we don't have the information feedback that we need. But it's fundamental that we do not try to find the numbers that will help us tell a nice story about what Monte de Piedad is doing through these foundations, but rather to find what these foundations are doing that are really changing the objective that they're looking for.
Wonderful, thank you, Pedro. We're gonna go to Timo in 1 minute, okay? But Sandy, another brave soul, has wandered up here. Role models for all of you, right? Who's next? Think about it back there. Sandy, what's your experience been? Why don't you share?
Well, I'd like to share a model that was developed out of Community Foundations of Canada and was just a very, very good answer for us at a time when our foundation was very small. And we represent a community of about 370,000 people. And we had very few funds to disperse to the community about a decade ago. So we engaged in a process called Vital Signs, and it took it out to the community. And the purpose of this was to really say, you know, how well do we know our community? And how well can, with the philanthropy that we have to disperse, it would be better informed to listen to people and then make the most of that money. And perhaps also, thirdly, lead to changes in the community, some of them political decisions, or some of them just bigger changes within the groups that we work with. So it started with the community identifying issue areas, and then we put surveys out to the community. They responded, and you really got into perception and reality. So then we went into a research phase where we involved local research, regional, our provincial government, and our national government with the support of CFC. And then we published this document called Vital Signs. Well, then what happened? Well, the community was really engaged. They were anxious to see this report come out. And then we turned it over to our granting committee. And then the grantees making application really came in through the lens of vital signs. And then reporting back to the community, you could address some of these issues. So from it, our board decided on what they would choose as initiatives that they really wanted to support. It led to a lot of community conversation and a lot of questions about measuring the impact. Well, we've been doing this now for 11 years. We're in our 11th year, and just some very dynamic changes. We live within a community with a lot of Indigenous and various groups, and that community came to us and said, well, you know, there's areas that we would like to see that were treated a little differently, and it was in the area of homelessness. So we developed for them one of the first Aboriginal coalitions to end homelessness. And this is a table of Indigenous people from up and down the island that we live on. So it's changes like that. And the vital conversations that we have in the community have developed groups like a funders group. We all fund in this community. How, based on vital signs and other research in the community, can we get better together at giving our resources out? So it's just one example of something that I think has turned our foundation from what I would call a reactive grantor into a proactive grantor. And we've developed so many more partners in the community through universities and other funders to make this being, I think, a very worthwhile project.
That's a great example. And Timo, you've got some examples too. Why don't you share, and then we can open up for questions from the audience, all right?
Okay. I think will your opinion about the measurement of impact is one of the dilemma. Not only dilemma, I think, but this is the challenge. Yeah. The important thing is the data, because how we can measure if the data is, we have no the data. Like in Philanthropy Indonesia, we have two documents. One is Philanthropy Indonesia Code of Ethics. We call it SAFI. We published it in 2008. This is a standard Etika Philanthropy Indonesia. We propose not only from the founder with the academician and the government. We have the principle of philanthropy, how to measure, and etc. And the second is grant check, 2010. This is how to measure the grant from the grantee to the recipient or intermediary. How the transparency, how the accountability, and all things about the governance. I think this.
So I just have one more thought about this idea of evaluation and strategy, that sometimes we leave the evaluation in the hands of people who understand it, but I think we have to be much more engaged with this process, because actually knowing what type of difference we are making and how we are assessing this, in my view, has to be in line with the values that we have, with the strategies that we have, and with the theory of change. So that's quite a critical process of alignment. And another thought I have is that because we want to track our impact, sometimes we have to settle for much smaller impact because we have to track it. And we also know that the important things that happen as a result of the work of many organizations. So I think we have to raise the conversation of impact, not just the impact of our organization, but the impact that we're having together as a field in whatever area we're building. So that would be my thought, and I hope you have examples as well in this area.
Well, we've got John here, and he's got a flip chart, so maybe he's got an example. And while John sets up, encourage anyone who doesn't want to come to the stage to think of a question you want to ask. And if you do want to come to the stage, come up front, and others might do a little switch off. They might get a coffee or chill out for a while. So, John?
I just want to quickly share with you the most important lesson I ever learned in evaluation and assessment. It was about 20 years ago when I was working for a progressive fund in Boston called Grassroots International, and we were funding a coffee cooperative in Chiapas. The cooperative was very patriarchal. The women had no role to play, they were given no space, nor did they have the capacity to grab the space, even if they were to be allowed. So they came to us asking for $10,000 for a series of trainings to bring the women up to capacity to lead within the organization. Things like public speaking, financial management, self-confidence, these kinds of things that the women needed. A year later, we get a report on the project, and it's a list. 30 women participated in X training. 25 women participated in Y training. Great, you spent the money, but what happened? They asked the women to share their stories. Many of them were illiterate, so they invited them to draw. And this is what one woman drew, and this is what they submitted in the envelope. She drew a picture of herself before the project. Then she drew an arrow after. That's the most important lesson I've ever had in evaluation. I don't know how we track it, how we measure it, but this is what change looks like in our work. We've got to find ways to honor that, capture it. This is change. Thank you.
Thanks, John, for fully embracing the fishbowl a la flip chart. That's amazing. And in some ways, this measurement space is actually about trying to arrive at what's most important. And
so we've got Francis up here now, who might join us next, and then there's a hand over near you too, Ian.
I wanted to say something really quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I love what John did. And what I wanted to get to, and I think after this I might step down and leave some more room for other people to come up. But for me, that's the core of, I think, the discussion that we need to have around measurement and around impact and all of these things. We need to ask ourselves, what are we measuring? Like, what is it that we feel should be a priority for philanthropy? Because if that's what we're looking for, and if that's what change looks like, it does have to do with a more holistic view. So it's about stop looking at things in compartments or in silos that are more easily measurable, and more about, and this is just my personal perspective about it, engaging this other way of living in the world, embodied by the perspective of indigenous communities and this Buen Vivir idea and all of that. But what are we looking for here? Do we want to maintain the system that we have so far? Do we want to keep looking at growth, economic growth, and personal individual growth? Or do we want to look at communities and the strengthening of communities and the well-being of communities as a whole, that considers other things that are not measurable, like having time to be with your children, you know, your emotional well-being. Emotions are so underrated, really. So that's the kind of change that I think we should be looking for. And if that's the case, should we think of other ways of measuring impact? And as a group, everybody in this room that is doing their own work in their own countries and their own organizations, should we come up with something different that's more holistic and looks towards that?
Okay, we've got going to go down here for a moment, and then we'll come back to the stage.
Hi, my name's Esther. I'm from the UK, from the Association of Charitable Foundations. So we're a membership organisation. Possibly a question to Alina, but also to the floor. And I don't know if this is answerable or not. So we have members, we do satisfaction, we deliver various activities and seminars and conferences like this. And as people were talking, what I was interested in, has anyone done any kind of impact measurement where we can ask our members tell us things and they will think, but the change that we make to the field, to the foundation's beneficiaries through our actions, is probably too far away. But I just wondered if anyone had ever done any kind of a spot check or any kind of systematic way of measuring that. I'd be quite interested.
That's a big question. Have you got the answer here, or are you lining up another question? No, not right yet? All right. Okay, let's hold that out, unless one of the wants to weigh in on that.
I'll try to give a partial answer to that. Since we work with all these foundations, one of the first things that we learn is that we shouldn't impose our values on them. And to be careful that they were not imposing their values on the people that they were trying to help. And we've been looking more into the qualitative side because we want to learn what they're doing, whether it's really impacting the community in the way that the community wants to be impacted, and not the way that here in Mexico City we decide that they should be impacted. And I was telling a short story in the morning of a community that lives in the southern part of Mexico City, and they build bricks. And they have to make from the mud, and they have to take these bricks into a furnace. And the furnace is fueled by whatever garbage is lying around. But the furnace has an owner, and he's the one who takes the vast majority of the profits. So the families that are living around the furnace, building these bricks and also fueling the furnace, only share on a small portion of that profit. And once the furnace is turned on, they have to keep fueling it for 24 to 36 hours continuously, because if it goes down in temperature, the whole bricks have to be thrown away. So these families, they have to use their own children to carry the bricks and the garbage to fuel the furnace. And this goes on for 1 or 2 days. And the institution that was working with them at first said, you know, we don't want any child labor here. So we're going to fight these small children being used as mules to carry these products. And then they understood the negative impact of that. They were imposing their values on that community. And the reality was when they took the children away from that process, the entire family could not be fed for that day because they needed that labor. And the parents were preoccupied with the children, of course. They wanted them to learn, they wanted to be well fed, but they also needed them to fuel that furnace and to keep the process going. So by taking away the children for those 1 or 2 days, they impacted the families on a negative way. So they learned to measure what they were doing in a different manner now. So what they're doing is letting those children still work, but trying to find a way that they can be educated, that they can be better fed with the income that the family can provide, with their own children working. It's hard for us to think about that. When you see children as young as 2, 3, 4 years carrying very heavy bricks on their backs, but when you really immerse yourself into that community and understand the reality of that community, then you understand that it's a fact of life and you shouldn't change it, at least not now. They have to think more in the future how to increase their level of income and so forth, so that then they will be able to take their children out of the working process.
There's so many tensions between all of this. We talked so much yesterday about rights and social justice, and we're also talking about the local context and learning from the community up, and so these are the tensions of understanding, are we making a difference or not, in so many ways. Thank you for that story. Who wants to go first here? I think, hey, share your story.
Yeah, I work with the Foundation for Civil Society in Tanzania, and we work with the local civil society organizations. So we are a grant-making organization, and we support local civil society organizations in Tanzania. The story of results measurement and impact measurement for us is a very long history, because we started supporting over 1,000 organizations in a year, and the staffing was just as much as 30, 35. So consolidation of all the reports, you can imagine coming up with something that you can share as something impactful was really a huge challenge. But we have learned through over time, and what we are doing now is we have 3 levels. First, we receive reports from partners and the stories that they report to us. They actually count in our rating 20%. So they might give us a number of stories. We trust them, we like them, but we only count as 20% of what we really consider as impact. But then we invest much also in the monitoring part that is done by ourselves. So we visit the field, responding also to the question that a colleague asked, to do some verification, whether what they are reporting to us is real. We also invest in a bit of in-depth research to verify what they are reporting to us. So at the end of the day, we come up with something concrete. But I understand there are a number of also challenges. The modalities have been changing in terms of aid. For example, we have had a number of methodologies. The log frames, then outcome mapping, now outcome harvesting, and all these things, theories of change, a lot of confusions. So at the end of the day, the major issue is first what the people at the local level consider as a result. And then does that really also tally with what we expect out of them? So I think it's the issue of aggregation, what we have and what the partners have, we come up with something interesting. But I think generally in the philanthropic world, I would also challenge. I think the issue of something considering as a result is also a challenge. I mean, it might differ from one person to another. For example, we had one consultant who came to review our results framework and said it's the perfect one. We actually also accepted it. But then it was reviewed and said it's not okay. So what I want to share is like you can have a number of consultants reviewing your results frameworks to ensure that you collect better results. But at the end of the day, also at the result that you think is the best, another person can say this is rubbish. So generally what I would say is what we think is important has also to reflect on the beneficiary side when they think it's an important result. I think we don't want to impose as everyone has also shared. So that's the brief from my perspective. Thanks.
And we've just had a new friend join us up here by the looks of it.
Hi.
If you can introduce yourself, that'd be great. Thanks for braving it.
It's Angela Bishop. I'm with the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia and part of the Community Foundations of Canada group here, and really pleased to be part of this. I'm on the other side of the country from my colleague Sandra that spoke a few minutes ago, but wanted to talk about our experience with vital signs. We represent the entire province of Nova Scotia, and we use the Vital Signs program to bring groups of people together in individual communities to mobilize action against the priorities that are identified in the Vital Signs projects. And for us, the impact is the number of people that show up in the room to be part of the process, and also the number of people that come together to learn about the outcomes and come together, form groups to take action. So for us, a small foundation with fewer resources than many foundations, we start at the place that it's people coming together and volunteers taking action where they can is the starting point. And we've had some great success in the Lunenburg area of Nova Scotia. They had their first Vital Signs in 2008. From that, there were 4 groups that came together to take action on community priorities, transportation, literacy. They did a follow-up Vital Signs in 2013, and from that, another group emerged to focus on economic development in the community. Business people, volunteers, philanthropists, continued to come together once a week for a long discussion about how they could change the economy in the area to impact on the social issues that they were addressing. And the more they talked, the more there was a mobilization of interest, the mobilization of resources, and to the point where there was a $1 million gift to the cleanup of a local river, which was a substantial gift in the province of Nova Scotia. Since their efforts connecting back to the vital signs and the needs in the communities, they've hired a full-time person through the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia, who focuses on attracting people to the community. In Nova Scotia, especially in our rural areas, we have a huge out-migration of youth, and yet we have a core group of people in our rural and coastal communities that are extremely committed to remaining in that community and continuing to build a vibrant community to attract others. So it's a real success story, but in the very beginning, our impact starts with the number of people who show up for the conversation.
Thanks, Angela. I think we're at a stage in this discussion where we've now heard a lot of great examples, right? We've heard a lot of different foundations, different organizations grappling with how to understand if they've made a difference. And I'd just like to pivot the conversation a little bit now to think about a big part of the group that's in this room that, as Benjamin said, is working in support of infrastructure to help foundations and community-based philanthropy, giving groups and such to be effective. And so the question that we want to grapple with is what might be necessary, what might be supportive, what might we help produce and resource to allow for foundations to be that much more impactful, or to better understand the tensions within impact measurement, or to draw on other frameworks that they think would be useful. So just to add this other dimension to our thinking, not just what's happening at the community level, but what is the philanthropic infrastructure support that could allow for a strengthened field, okay? So let's hold that question as something. If someone wants to respond to that straight away, Marsha, okay.
And then we'll go back to the stage maybe.
Yeah. I was just reflecting on this the moment you asked the question, so I take the opportunity to jump in. In our own context, in Russia, I work in CAF. Obviously, everybody who makes grants uses the traditional evaluation of projects, like how many people, how many workshops, and all the rest of it. Well, it kind of surfaces for the purpose of accounting for, what the money was spent for. But in the last few years, we started discovering for ourselves in the first place this kind of impact measurement that looks at the change in well-being of people the projects are, are aimed at, the beneficiaries, the final beneficiaries. Although we were initially very skeptical about that, we found out very quickly that it's really a really great way not to just measure the impact of, what you do, but also to promote a kind of more strategic way for the new philanthropists we work with. Because usually how these foundations, these new foundations start, the founder has a great image, an idea of how the world should look like. And the whole strategy of the foundation is built on this initial image, which may have nothing to do with the real world. Because these people, well, they don't see much of the world usually. They've got lots of money and they move in a totally different kind of circle of life. So giving them the tool which would actually help them to see if something changed because of their work in people's lives, it's a great way, a really powerful way of kind of making philanthropy, do better work. And I had a very recent conversation with family members of one of those, biggest philanthropists in the country. So they took me out to lunch because we helped them, at the beginning of their foundation. And they said, actually, we're very concerned because, we have a very good staff. They do the evaluation and measurement, and they tell us that, the projects are doing great. But how can we really know if something changes in the people's lives? And I was really, really happy to hear that, because this means that this foundation actually made this journey, and they are now interested in what happens. So I think as infrastructure organizations, it's really one of the kind of core business of ours to promote this kind of impact measurement, because it will actually impact the quality of philanthropy in the country.
So this encouraging this shift, or this opening up this space to really allow for the well-being and that softer, more nuanced approach to understanding if we've made a difference is going to be key. It's certainly key in the indigenous context. And Sophia, if you want to reflect on that, and then we'll introduce you, okay?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I want to introduce another thing that has to do with that. And I was having a conversation yesterday at dinner, and we were talking about this whole issue of trust, I think that the whole trust thing comes into play when you're talking about impact and when you're talking about how reports are done with, the constituency that you're serving and things like that. We need to find ways to really build a relationship of trust with our grantees and try to figure out how is it that they want to speak about their work, or how they within their own communities measure the change. Because nobody better than them is going to be able to see how something is working or not working. And for us as grant makers, to be able to be more flexible with that. As an example, in terms of tools, we're looking into, for example, video reporting, and see if we do video reporting, that might be actually easier for some of the indigenous communities that we work with, because they're used to the oral thing instead of writing things down. It's easier for them to speak about what's going on for them, how a particular initiative or a particular project supported their community through storytelling. And so in order for that to happen, we need to develop more trust relationships with our constituencies. And maybe to the question of what happens at a network perspective or from a network place, maybe I would find it helpful. For example, I would love to have some additional tools that we could use that could sort of guide us into how to cope, because this is something that I still haven't figured out, like how to cope with being able to speak about what's going on and what's changed in the communities that we're working with, and at the same time comply with all of the quantitative stuff. You know, how to put those two things together is still a challenge. Like I would love to hear if somebody has an answer about that. But again, I'm sorry to keep banging the same drum. I would have to go back to say, what is it that we are measuring? And continue to think of that even from a networking perspective. Should we be changing the way that we encourage foundations that are within your network, for example, to try and look at the impact differently? So I would leave it at that.
Thanks. My name is Eugenie Harvey. I'm from the Funding Network in the UK, and we are a giving circle which has a particular live model. And one of the things that we do is work with other organisations to help them adopt our giving circle model. And this conference has been really useful for a couple of really key things for me, so thank you for that. And one of the things that it's been very useful for is giving me the thought, which I'd had at the back of my mind in the past, but which has really crystallised from this conversation, and that is just what you were saying, Sophia, around video, using video to capture stories and to use that to complement some surveys and more statistical stuff, which we do still need to capture, but to use video to record some of the softer sides and the stories that will really complement the data. But the point that I wanted to make is the other thing that I'm doing with some of the donors in my network who don't really understand the work that we're doing perhaps in Central and Eastern Europe. And it's very simple for us because we're in the UK to do a study tour. So this year I'm actually planning on taking a group of my donors to observe and I hope participate in giving circles in Central and Eastern Europe, because I think they will be absolutely blown away by the experience. And of course, you know, not every single donor needs to have the experience. It'll only need to be a couple of them, and that will translate, that will ripple through the network of, you know, hundreds of people. And I think that's going to be really powerful, the first-hand encounter with the work where it's possible.
I'm just struck by how the amazing description we had earlier about the perils of populism introduced us to this ongoing dynamic of us and them, and the space between someone with one perspective and someone with a different perspective. And the things that break through that are things like trust, or like a story, or like values that we heard about from the very beginning. They are relational qualities. They're not transactional qualities. It's even hard to aggregate them up to something transformational. It's very much in this relational space that many of us have had an experience that says this is what it's really all about, and yet really struggle to find times when we've been effective at then communicating and sharing results in that frame. So let's keep working on this. This might be something that we can come away with, not as the only part of understanding measuring impact, because there's a broader frame to consider as well, but there is something here that we're getting at in this conversation. So thanks for your patience, okay?
Well, it's fine. I think hopefully some of what I want to share is really very much related to that. So my name is Terry Behrens. I'm at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy. We're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I've been there for about 7 years now. And prior to that, I was the Director of Evaluation at the Kellogg Foundation. So I want to share some of the things that I learned from some really wonderful consultants that we worked with while I was at Kellogg. But first, I just want to do a little plug for an article that Ian and some of his colleagues wrote. One of my hats is I edit the Foundation Review, and Ian and some of his colleagues wrote an article about the use of vital signs, and that's available. You can find that online, so if you want to read more about that work. So the other things I wanted to share were about just kind of flipping how we think about evaluation. I had a wonderful colleague who talked to me about, as I was the director of evaluation, trying to come up with all these quantitative measures, about how for Indigenous communities, evaluation is too often something that's done to them. So we're going to evaluate you and see if you have been fixed by our beneficence, right? So she really helped connect me with a network of evaluators who were doing much more storytelling-based approaches to evaluation. And some of the tools that they used, I think, are really terrific, and just wanted to share some of that with you. One tool is photo voices, which some of you may be familiar with. And again, there's a lot of information on this online if you just Google photo voices. But the idea is that you give, people have cell phones now, or you give disposable cameras, and ask not the people running the programs, but the beneficiaries of the program to take pictures that show whatever you want to ask them to show. So we've done it where you ask people to take pictures of what does your community look like now, and then after the program, take some pictures that demonstrate the change that happened in your community. One of the benefits of doing it that way is then you have these photos that you can then share with other community leaders to help document the change. So the evaluation becomes not only evaluating the change, but it becomes part of helping make the change happen. So it was learned both the value of using data and information to shape local policy, and they learned some really practical skills about how to use the video equipment. So I think there are a lot of more kind of visual methods in particular. If you just shift that from thinking about evaluation as something that we're doing to people to get data for us, but we also want to empower them to use data and tools as part of their growth process.
Thank you for that great example of data doesn't have to be scary either. It can be visual, it can be accessible. We've got a little bit going on in the corner over here. So our two ringleaders have some questions, and we're also going to have another little art show. So maybe we can have the drawing first and then the questions.
Hi, Martin Garber-Conrad from Edmonton Community Foundation in Canada. I just wanted to share a little evaluation lesson that I learned probably 20 years ago, maybe 30. Anyway, a long time ago, before I came to the foundation. Is it at all clear what that is? Very good, garbage can. We were about to start a school lunch program, and so I went out to Vancouver to consult with a principal who had started one in his school, and we were talking about the program, and I said, I mean, we think there are hungry kids in these schools, but how do we know for sure? And he said, don't hire an evaluator. He said, 10 minutes after lunchtime, walk around the schoolyard and look in the garbage cans. If you don't see a lot of lunches, the kids ate them. If they ate the lunches, they were hungry. So I've tried to bring that lesson to the foundation, particularly when we make small grants that do not fully fund a program. we almost never demand evaluation. If other funders are funding a program and the agency has to prepare any kind of evaluative report for some other funder, we stipulate in the grant agreement that that report is acceptable for us and they need do nothing else. Finally, when we do fund large-scale collaborative initiatives that would benefit both as a learning for the agencies as well as learning for us and the wider community about solving complex problems, we pay for evaluation. We don't make that part of the grant. We pay for the evaluation, and I kind of think it's immoral to demand 10, 20, 30% of a grant be spent on keeping me happy. So we try not to do that, and I would encourage you all to, whatever your sphere is, you know, if you can get away with it, to do that too. Spend the time up front using evidence-based practices, funding organizations that you trust to deliver. Put the effort in up front rather than yet another evaluation showing that hungry kids who are fed do better in school. Like, do we really have to prove that for the 27th time? Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to go to Benjamin, our trusted leader, who has a question that I think will start to wrap up and synthesize the qualitative, quantitative component of impact measurement that we're talking about within a larger framework.
Yeah, so it's really a simple question. I think we had incredible, we had incredible examples about impact measurement in a different way and looking at holistic and relationship, etc. And I think Ian also made a comment, is there an incompatibility between this crucial way of assessing each and everyone's work and the necessary also effort to aggregate information and track the change that is being done at a more global level? And we have, it seems like we have on the one hand the SDGs and other approaches that are trying to structure evaluation and to have a kind of common standards to gather all this information and see what is the change globally and use it as a powerful tool to influence policy, etc., etc. And on the other hand, we see that we cannot measure everything and that we must find other ways to do it. And we had so incredible examples here. So it's really a question to anyone in the room who has a clue on how we connect this.
The grand unified theory of measuring impact. How do we take stock of what's happening at the macro level where we really do want to understand? Are we making a difference around water? Are we making a difference around, you know, the well-being of children? But then also responding right at the community level in a way that is meaningful and builds on this relational element. So I want to, jump right in, Angela, for the last reflection.
Thanks, Ian. One thing I don't think that we've mentioned about the vital signs program that's used in Canada and, of course, around the world now in other countries that CFC has worked with, is that often evaluations are text-heavy and very complicated. And what the vital signs program does is takes that sometimes complex information about what things are really like, the state at any point in time, and it presents it in a really simple way. And what that does is really engage other people in the community, maybe people who have a lower level of awareness. And we, like our friends on Victoria Island are working with First Nations communities to develop a vital signs. And one of the key outcomes we'd like to have from that project is a presentation of all the things everyone in Nova Scotia ought to know about our first communities in the province in a simple way. And we think that's really a way to mobilize action and have more ordinary Nova Scotians become involved in reconciliation across the province.
Can I have a small comment too? Also answering to the question of the perspective of philanthropy support organizations, I think, as Esther was saying, part of the challenge is our outcomes are not direct ultimate outcomes, but they are engaging our constituency, so we are one step remote. So if we want to learn what we're doing, then we have to engage this constituency in evaluation processes too. And to answer to Benjamin, I don't think it's anything wrong to try to find the common areas that we could evaluate together and try to put data together. But my reflection is just not to believe that this is the full picture. I think Doug was saying before that when we focus on what is in common, these are important, but they might not be the most important thing. So I think in evaluation as well, it's very helpful to build this common picture, but I think it's part of our role to inspire our constituencies to be motivated to do their own evaluations, share stories, and challenge this process all the time about what is the most meaningful. And one final remark about evaluation for what, accountability versus learning. This would be maybe two important outcomes. I think if we focus on demonstrating all the time, that means all the time we look for the evidence that shows, that confirms. So in this idea of critical thinking, I think whenever we do evaluation, we have to challenge ourselves to look for evidence that this confirms our beliefs and not evaluate just projects and outcomes, but also our theory of change. So that's
super. Well, thank you, everybody. Yeah. Thanks for the great questions from the floor. Thank you for those who had the courage to make their way up onto stage and to share. Thank you to the original panelists who really helped to get us on our way. And I think we can take Benjamin's question forward as a big part of the work to do as a network. So just join me in thanking everyone for their participation. All right, Jenny, back to you.
Thank you, Ian and Lauren, for encouraging people out from behind the seaweeds to come onto the stage and join the Fishbowl. It's time for a break. Now, yesterday, when it came to the concurrent sessions, a number of people were wandering for some considerable time trying to find where their session was. If you look on the first page after the cover, there's a little key. So if you went, the same rooms are identified by track. So if you went to an emerging approaches track yesterday, you would have been in Don Julian. So you may still wonder, people will try and help to get you where you need to go, but there is actually, I didn't know this either, a key to where you need to be in here. So coffee time now. There are more exhibitions in the coffee room, and if you want to sign up for affinity tables at lunch, please do that now as well. Thank you. Oh, and we will gather later in the afternoon for the Barry Gaberman lecture, so it's small groups from here on in.